Hello, fellow troubadours. I'm excited to be doing another interview, which is an installment of the Inside Scoop. And I'm very happy that today I'm going to be speaking with Sue Relihan. And we are going to be talking about boundaries, everyone's favorite subject, right? So the reason I wanted to talk to Sue about boundaries, number one, is because she incorporates this in the work that she does and she's like super good at it. And number two, I think boundaries is something that we all struggle with. I know I do, so it's obviously it's going to be helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to you too, because I think we struggle with boundaries on a personal level a lot of times, and also on a business level, like as a business owner or as an entrepreneur, which makes sense, I guess, because as an entrepreneur, right, we wear all these hats, we have clients, we've got maybe employees, we have all these people that are basically making demands on us, and that's a good thing, right? Because we want to have clients and have them have expectations of us, but sometimes it can get a little bit tough trying to get everything done, and boundaries could be very helpful. So before we get started, I want to welcome you, Sue, and I also want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
I'm Sue Relihan. I own a company called Find Serenity Empowerment. I am a holistic wellness practitioner. I use a combination of therapy, coaching, hypnosis, and body work, depending on the scenario we're in, to really help people find. There's a reason my business is called Find Serenity and Empowerment. All of us are looking for a place of peace inside, and most of us need a boost in empowerment, on putting ourselves back on the top of our priority list. In this scenario, on creating healthy boundaries with our business, with other people, and most importantly, with ourselves.
Ooh. Yeah, that last one really rings true, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So thank you for being here, and we are going to get started right off the bat. So I'm also going to check our timer, and so we don't talk too long. So first of all, I know that you've said, and I have heard this too, that boundaries are important. So I want to know, what do you mean when you say boundaries? Like, what does it mean to have a boundary? What's the definition or your definition of it? And then why do we even need them?
So I actually have a definition of boundaries that I really like.
Okay.
And they are the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual limits on how we allow other people and ourselves to treat us. It's about really creating space so that people know exactly where the boundaries are. And for many of us, we didn't grow up with healthy boundaries. So as adults, we get to actually regenerate, and they're fluid. Boundaries can change depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending on where we are in life.
Interesting. I love how you just said that word limits really kind of stood out for me. So limits on how we are treated, and in all regards. That's really interesting. So that makes me ask this question: does everyone need to set their own boundaries? Like, is it a conscious or a subconscious thing that we do?
Well, it starts out, we're taught as we grow up. And if we live in a healthy environment, boundaries don't even have to be discussed. But if you live in an environment that's not quite as healthy, and for some reason, like the bathroom door example comes to mind.
Okay.
You grow up in a household where you can, as a young child, go to the bathroom by yourself, shut the door, and expect privacy. That's a pretty healthy boundary. You can ask for help if you need it. Otherwise, you take care of your business, you leave. A lot of people grew up in households where there were either so many people that they never knew if somebody was going to come in and out of the bathroom, or they weren't allowed to shut the bathroom door. And so It's not like it's disgust. It's just what we grew up with. It's really all healthy relationships, personal and professional, have boundaries.
Okay, all right. So some of these things, it looks like nobody, like you just mentioned, nobody said, okay, Bobby, here's the rules. You just kind of pick them up as you go.
Well, or you may live in a household that has very strict rules.
Oh, okay.
Healthy boundaries are always negotiated. From the time we're old enough to make decisions and interact, we learn to negotiate. That's whether we're working with clients, with time management, communication needs, saying no, with family members, within ourselves.
Mm,
Sometimes
okay.
we have to limit our own interactions, especially around time management and the things we say to ourselves.
Okay. So you just mentioned saying no. And I don't know if it's just me, I'm thinking it's probably not just me, that we think that somehow saying no is a bad thing and that we're not supposed to say no. So how do we feel good about negotiating a boundary when we think that it's a bad thing to tell somebody no?
So, not everyone believes that. And it's really important as we learn to negotiate these boundaries with ourselves and really look at some of the worthiness issues. Most of us, and primarily as women, we weren't necessarily shown how to say no, or we grew up in environments where being a people pleaser, and I'll tell you in my own life, being a people pleaser was a survival technique.
Mm,
As I got older, I learned I needed to set boundaries and say no. But until we learn those things, till we do some of that empowerment increasing, where we feel we really need to take care of ourselves. And when we understand what our own limits are, that makes a big difference. A lot of us work and work and work until we're exhausted. Then our physical body sets the boundary.
oh,
Nope, I'm going to give you a headache, stomach ache. Our body will speak for us. And so a lot of what I do is help people learn to listen when those are whispers and not cosmic two by fours.
ah, interesting. Okay, I really liked so actually, are you saying that saying no actually can be a way that we're taking care of ourselves? Did I hear that
Not only a way of
correctly?
taking care of ourselves, it can also be a healthy way for us to take care of others.
Mm,
And it's not commonly recognized by people pleasers that pleasing someone all the time sets up, I don't want to use the word, it sets up an expectation. If you're always taking care of something, if you have no boundaries, the other person begins to expect that. They stop
sure.
taking care of themselves. And like, especially with clients and time management, I'll tell you one of my biggest pet peeves is people who do not respect other people's time. I used to think it was disrespectful of me. Now I realize it's a sign of a boundary issue within them. Has
Oh,
very rarely anything to do with someone else. And once I saw that, then I could soften my expectations. Now,
mm,
I happen to fall on the side of that boundary. I'm always early. It is part of that people pleasing thing that's so entrenched. Don't want anybody waiting on me. But
oh,
now, as an adult, if there's a legitimate need to wait, I'll say, I need 5 minutes, or this doesn't work for me today. That's harder to do with clients. One, they're paying us,
Right, right.
but sometimes they need that help to learn to set their own limits.
Mm, okay. So if you're setting limits with other people or you're setting boundaries or limits for yourself, how does that look different? Because and the reason I'm asking that is because if I'm setting a boundary with you, I might say, we only have 30 minutes to talk, or you can't call me after 5 o'clock, or certain those kind of boundaries. But how do you do that with yourself?
Well, one, you start identifying what your values are.
Okay.
So going to bed at 11 o'clock every night so that you know you're going to get 7 to 8 solid hours of sleep. And 10:45 comes, you're reading something. You're like, just one more chapter, just one more chapter. The
You
next
get
thing
my
you know, it's
spot there.
well, you override your own boundary, which as an adult you're entitled to do. But when you wake up the next morning and you've only had 4 or 5 hours of sleep, it affects the rest of your day. And most of us have an inner critic then that comes popping in and says, you bad person, depending on what favorite name you like to call yourself. Look what you did. It's going to be a horrible day. You're a horrible person. Why
Mm,
would anybody want to count on you when you can't count on yourself?
wow.
Those are really tough voices. And often we need somebody else to help us untangle them in our systems,
Okay.
inside us.
Ah, okay. Because I've heard of inner critic before, that you have an inner critic. I think I've got one or more. So why are your inner critic, is your inner critic or are your inner critics, plural, how come they're so judgy? Like, why are they being so mean and say that kind of messaging?
Because they think they're helping you. This is a difference from what I used to do in the work I do today. I used to believe we needed to go in and get rid of that criticism. Tell it to sit down in the corner and shut up.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. I know better. The work I do now, they really think they're helping. They're a protector inside. They're afraid if they're not beating you up, you're not going to do something. If they're not beating you up for not getting enough sleep, you'll never sleep again. Often these are parts of us that are younger that forget that we're adults now and really can run our own lives. But it's again, it's about being compassionate, hearing them out. The best question is to get quiet and say, what are you afraid will happen?
Oh, that's good.
And let the critic answer.
What are you afraid will happen? So if we stop, I don't know if that's the right word. So if we look at our inner critic as someone who's trying to help us instead of just a big bully, is that kind of going down the lines of what you're talking about?
Yes, a inner critic becomes a healthy inner champion. And often that critic can help us set boundaries when we understand why it's there, when we understand what it's afraid of. And then we don't tell it to go away, but we can change its job description. If you see me at 10:45 at night and I don't want to put the book down, you have my permission to come in and remind me there could be consequences. Now, it doesn't get to make the decision, but it reminds you the decision is there to be made
Oh,
instead of waiting until the next morning, and it has free reign on just telling you how horrible you are.
Okay. So if you give it permission to remind you, you're heading off the path of the critic being just beating you up once it's happened. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And once it gets used to you listening to it, it doesn't have to beat you up as much because it's actually getting a voice. It'll turn into a calming voice instead of that bully that's constantly bombarding you. You're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Why are you so bad?
Oh,
It'll slow down and go, do you really want to do that? Are you looking at the consequences? Now, it doesn't get to say you can't do that because there's consequences. But when then you look at it from a healthier standpoint, you go, I only have 40 pages left. I hear you. I'm going to go past this boundary this time. Thank you for letting me know. And I promise in the morning, I'm not going to grumble when my alarm goes off.
that
You
sounds
negotiate.
simple. That actually sounds simple. And I know I'm reducing this to probably way more simple than it is, but just being kinder to your critics so that they're then in turn going to be kinder to you.
It's all about understanding the different parts of us. I'm trained in something called internal family systems therapy. The basis behind it is we all have multiple parts to us. We have an inner critic, and we have younger parts. We have angry parts. We have sad parts and grieving parts and disappointed parts. It's letting them have a voice now. It's a compassionate curiosity. What's going on? And often talking to them as if they're a small child, because most of the time they're younger. They get frozen in time. Something happened and they had to turn on this defense mechanism. And they really believe they're helping. And you just ask them, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is won't happen? It's usually one or the other. And you get to know them and you update them also. So like for me, one of the conversations I'm 60 years old now. I have a pretty great resume of success in my past. And I'll talk to a part and go, one, do you know this is the year 2021? Do you know I am 60? Do you know I've written a best-selling book? Do you know? And I can go through all of my accomplishments to let the small part of me know it's made it. I'm from its future. It's going to be okay.
Mm,
And if you take the time, it'll start listening to that. Now, sometimes you need somebody to help you do that.
right.
I mean, there's all kinds of books and videos on IFS out there and some self-help type things. But often we need somebody to listen to us because sometimes we don't even hear our own critics.
Mm.
We don't hear our own issues until somebody else compassionately. That's why I have an issue with coaches that are like bullies. Like, no, I have enough bullies inside of me. I don't need you to bully me too.
Yeah. And I also wonder if people think that their inner critic, because when you said that, I thought I would look for a coach that bullied me because I'm so used to doing that to myself. And so that whole idea of finding someone who's compassionate with you and all your parts, but also encouraging you to be compassionate with yourself and all of your parts would be so helpful. And if we're going to be trying to enforce some kind of boundaries, I could see where being compassionate would be much more effective than being bullying. I think it's just a different way to look at it.
It
Right.
is. And it's about letting the part communicate what it needs. And then making the decision from present time to
Mhm.
see if it's a need that can be met. It's no different than communicating needs between your clients. You own a business. You don't have free reign to every client every day.
True.
You can't spend 14 hours a day with every client every day, meeting their every question and demand. Just saying that sounds ludicrous. Like, well, nobody would ask me to do that.
Sure.
But what if you have clients that email you 13 times a day when you're not in the middle of something? Now, again, it's about negotiating. I know you do a lot of writing for people. On those days that you are actually interactive writing, you could have 14 emails exchanged in a day.
Mhm.
That's acceptable. But if you're not in the middle of a project and somebody just keeps calling, like emailing and asking a question or texting and bothering you without respect, but we get other people to respect our boundaries when we start respecting our boundaries ourselves.
Amen. Okay, we just hit the nugget right there. And respecting our own boundaries will cause it. I know it's not the same, but it reminds me of the example that everybody always uses about like being on the airplane and putting on your own oxygen mask first before you can save somebody else. So since we hit that point, I think we're done for the moment, but I think that was really helpful. And I hope that you all listening to this find that helpful too. In just some of my takeaway nuggets are, being compassionate and looking at your inner critics as intending to be helpful and have that, intention, I think is really important, because I always think once you break a boundary, that then it goes into that bad person thing. But I like what you said, Sue, about negotiating even with yourself and your parts. And if you choose to break a boundary, at least you're doing it and you know what those consequences are. So I think that was awesome. We could literally talk for hours about this, I know, but we don't necessarily have time. So I will put contact information for Sue below so that when you watch the video, you can see her contact information, and I encourage you to reach out to her. One of the things I think that's amazing about what Sue does, and also, and she mentioned this too, is putting yourself at the top of the list, because we're so taught, some of us, that that's selfish and it's not a good thing to put ourselves at the top of the list. But especially, being a person, right? But being an entrepreneur, if we don't put ourselves at the top of the list, sometimes nobody else is going to come and do that for us. So reach out to Sue if you need to. We are going to close up with the thing that I like to call the lightning round. And these are questions that Sue doesn't know that I'm going to ask, and they're just the real quick ones. But first one is, what book, business or self-improvement or anything, what book are you reading right now, or did you just read or listen?
I just reread. Right now I'm reading some IFS books on trauma. But the book that I just reread, I picked it up a few weeks ago, was called The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. And one of the things that really struck me is that need to say yes often applies as much to ourselves. We get so used to beating ourselves up, and for me, a major thing is to isolate, withdraw. And she made herself a promise. She went an entire year and accepted invitations. And that's kind of where I am right now, coming out of the pandemic, is learning to see inside of myself where I want to, like what I'm willing to say yes to. Yes is as much a boundary as a no.
Ooh, another nugget. I like that. I like that. That's great. The Year of Yes, Shonda Rhimes. Okay. What's your favorite self-care that you pay for?
Massage. but I've
Okay.
also been a massage therapist for 24 years, so
Wow.
I
Okay. Makes sense.
understand the need.
Okay. What's your favorite self-care that you do not pay for?
Bath, sitting and reading in the bathtub, like absolute quiet time. Um, and I read trash, not like romance novels, because I spend so much time reading books about trauma and books about IFS and learning, because
Right.
I do believe we all need to continue to learn. Really good self-care is in the bathtub with a romance novel, like complete, take me away.
Sounds awesome. Okay, last two questions. What's the last picture on your camera? I mean, on your phone, your camera on your phone. Is it handy?
It is. It would be. Great. It's not something terribly embarrassing. Where
You
are
could
my
lie and we
photos?
wouldn't even know it.
Oh, no, actually, I do know. I just had my tree
Well, there you
front
go.
taken out. And this is a picture of while the guys were taking the shredding the stump.
Oh,
And this was a big deal the last 3 months of my life, and they finally finished it. So thankfully, it was not something terribly embarrassing.
awesome. Okay, final question. What is your superpower?
Listening, without a doubt. I love to listen. I listen verbally, non-verbally. I really have learned to listen between what is said, to feel what sometimes what's not being said, you can feel it almost as strongly. I am really good at holding space for people.
Yes, you are. I can speak from experience. Sue certainly is. And that's, I think, part of why you're so good at what you do. So thank you for joining me. And I hope that people can take some nuggets like I did about setting boundaries and being kind to ourselves while still meeting some boundaries, even if they feel like they're strict. So hopefully this is helpful to everyone, and join us next time for the Inside Scoop. Bye.